A young black woman named Aaliyah was arrested for driving her own car, with the police officer fully confident in his authority, believing he had caught a criminal. But just 5 minutes later, fate intervened in an unexpected way, leaving Officer Mitchell deeply embarrassed. How will this moment change both of their lives? Before we start the story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments, and if you like stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Aaliyah sat at the table in her cozy family kitchen, the flickering light of 18 candles illuminating her young and hopeful face. It was her 18th birthday, a significant milestone she had been eagerly awaiting. Surrounding her were her loving family and friends, but the most special person to her was Grandma Mariah, who had raised her after her parents passed away in an accident when Aaliyah was very young. Grandma Mariah stood beside her, eyes full of pride and emotion, her face etched with the hardships she had endured alongside her granddaughter. With her gray hair and a face marked by time, Grandma Mariah wasn't just a grandmother. She was a mother, a mentor, and a spiritual guide throughout Aaliyah's upbringing. "Aaliyah, I am so proud of you," Grandma Mariah said, her voice trembling but filled with love. "You've grown into a strong and determined young woman. Getting accepted into medical school is an incredible achievement, and if your parents were here, they would be just as proud of you as I am." Aaliyah looked at her grandmother, her eyes sparkling, feeling an incomparable sense of love and support. She had worked tirelessly, balancing school and part-time jobs to save for college, and her dream of becoming a doctor was slowly becoming a reality. Although she had achieved much, Aaliyah knew she wouldn't be where she was without the sacrifice and patience of Grandma Mariah. "Thank you, Grandma," Aaliyah whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "I couldn't have done this without you." Grandma Mariah smiled, her eyes teary. Then she placed a hand on Aaliyah's shoulder and said, "I have a surprise for you." She motioned for Aaliyah to follow her to the front door. Aaliyah was curious, unable to imagine what was in store. When they both stepped onto the front porch, Aaliyah couldn't believe her eyes. Parked right outside was a used but still shiny car, with a big red bow tied to the roof. Her heart skipped a beat as she looked at the car and then back at Grandma Mariah. "Grandma, did you buy this for me?" Aaliyah couldn't believe what she was seeing. Grandma Mariah laughed, her smile filled with joy. "Yes, Aaliyah, this is your birthday present. I know you've been working hard, and you need a way to get to medical school, so I decided to get you this car to help you get started." Aaliyah stood frozen for a moment, feeling like her dreams were coming true. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she rushed into Grandma Mariah's arms, hugging her tightly as if she never wanted to let go. "Thank you, Grandma. I don't know what to say. I won't let you down." Grandma Mariah gently patted Aaliyah's back and said, "You don't have to say anything. Just promise me you'll use this gift to pursue your dreams and do great things in life. I know you'll succeed." Aaliyah stepped back, her eyes filled with gratitude as she gazed at the car. It wasn't just a car, it was a symbol of the faith Grandma Mariah had in her, and it motivated her to keep striving. With this car, she felt like every road was now open before her, leading to opportunities and successes she had always dreamed of. She looked at Grandma Mariah once more and said, "I promise, I'll use it to chase my dreams and do good in this world." Grandma Mariah's eyes glistened with pride. Together they stood before the car, feeling the joy and hope for the future. Aaliyah sensed this was just the beginning of a new journey, and she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Aaliyah felt a sense of joy and freedom as she sat in her new car, ready to embark on a new chapter of her life. She gripped the steering wheel tightly, taking a deep breath, savoring the new car smell, and imagining the journeys ahead. After weeks of driving lessons and passing her test, today was the day she could finally drive on her own for the first time. Every step toward the future felt clearer and more powerful than ever. Driving through her familiar neighborhood, Aaliyah focused carefully on the traffic signs and intersections, her eyes scanning the road ahead. The breeze gently swept through the car window, bringing with it a rare sense of freedom she had never experienced before. The quiet streets of the residential area, lined with neat houses and trees, made her feel like life was full of promise. But the peaceful atmosphere was suddenly shattered when Aaliyah noticed red and blue flashing lights in her rearview mirror. Her heart raced as she realized it was a police car. She took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, reminding herself that she hadn't done anything wrong. Maybe this is just a routine check, she reassured herself, and slowly pulled over to the side of the road. As the police car stopped behind her, Aaliyah sensed something wasn't right. She glanced at her dashboard, checking for any warning lights, but everything seemed fine. Suddenly, the door of the police car opened, and a tall, stern-looking officer stepped out. It was Officer John Mitchell, a veteran cop who had worked in this area for years. In Mitchell's mind, seeing a young black woman driving such a nice car immediately raised suspicion. Something's definitely wrong, he thought. Mitchell approached Aaliyah's car, his hand hovering near his belt, lightly resting on his holster as a precaution. His eyes scanned the car, inspecting it as if he were looking for signs of forced entry or damage. When he reached the window, Aaliyah rolled it down, trying to keep her voice steady and friendly. "Hello, officer," she said, her heart still pounding in her chest. "Is there a problem?" Mitchell didn't respond right away. He looked at her with cold suspicion. "License and registration," he demanded, his tone sharp and lacking any warmth. Aaliyah immediately reached into her bag to retrieve her documents, making sure to move slowly to avoid any misunderstandings. She handed Mitchell her license and registration. He flipped through the papers, his eyes narrowing when he saw the car was registered under the name Mariah Jefferson. "This car isn't in your name," Mitchell said, his voice dripping with skepticism. "Care to explain?" Aaliyah swallowed hard, a sense of unease rising within her. "This is my grandmother's car. She gave it to me as a birthday present. I just got my license, and today is the first time I'm driving it by myself." Mitchell wasn't convinced. "Step out of the car," he ordered, his hand moving closer to his gun. The doubt and prejudice in his heart had clouded his ability to hear her explanation. In his mind, the sight of a young black woman driving a car like this could only mean one thing: theft. Aaliyah's heart pounded, and she took a deep breath, following his order. She knew she had no other choice, but the feeling of humiliation and injustice overwhelmed her. Mitchell didn't give her a chance to explain further. With cold, determined eyes, he commanded, "Place your hands on the hood of the car." Aaliyah felt the tension mounting as she complied. She couldn't believe that a day filled with so much hope and joy had turned into such a nightmare. In her mind, questions echoed. Why is this happening to me? Is it just because I'm a black woman? Mitchell began to search her roughly, completely ignoring her quiet pleas. She spoke with a trembling voice, trying to stay calm. "Please, call my grandmother. She can explain everything." But Mitchell wasn't listening. To him, his biases had already decided she was a criminal. While Aaliyah desperately begged Mitchell to call her grandmother, a wave of helplessness and fear washed over her. Little did she know that, on the other end of the line, Grandma Mariah had just received a frantic call from her granddaughter and was rushing to the scene. Her heart raced as she imagined Aaliyah, an innocent young woman, being treated like a criminal simply because of her skin color. In just a few minutes, Grandma Mariah arrived at the scene. As she stepped out of her car, she saw Officer Mitchell handcuffing Aaliyah, her granddaughter's eyes filled with terror and humiliation. A surge of anger rose within Mariah. Without hesitation, she stormed over to the officer, her voice firm and commanding. "Officer Mitchell!" Grandma Mariah shouted, her voice brimming with authority. "What are you doing? This is my granddaughter, and that car is a birthday gift I gave her. I am Mariah Jefferson, a civil rights attorney, and I demand you release my granddaughter immediately." Officer Mitchell froze, a look of surprise crossing his face, as the elderly woman approached. Faced with Mariah, his confidence wavered. Mariah Jefferson was no stranger in this community. Her name was well known for her work in civil rights cases and anti-discrimination lawsuits, and she had won many significant battles. Mitchell swallowed hard, realizing the gravity of the situation he had placed himself in. "Ma'am, I was just doing my job. The car wasn't registered in her name, and that raised my suspicion." Mitchell began to explain, but his voice lacked the conviction it had moments before. "Doing your job?" Mariah cut him off, her eyes piercing into Mitchell's. "Are you doing your job based on my granddaughter's skin color? Is it because Aaliyah is black that you automatically assume she can't own a nice car? This is blatant racial profiling, and I won't let this go unchallenged." Mitchell felt cold sweat running down his back. People around them began to take notice of the scene, with some pulling out their phones to record. Feeling the weight of the situation bearing down on him, Mitchell hesitated, but then he loosened his grip on the handcuffs and quickly removed them from Aaliyah's wrists. Aaliyah stood up, her hands trembling and her eyes welling with tears, but she tried to keep herself composed. She felt both relief and shame, knowing that many were witnessing this moment. Grandma Mariah stepped forward and wrapped Aaliyah in a protective embrace, shielding her from the injustice that had just unfolded. Mariah looked straight at Officer Mitchell, her voice cold but powerful. "You will be held accountable for this. I will not tolerate such blatant discrimination." Mitchell, now fully aware of his mistake and surrounded by the watchful eyes of the crowd, stepped back. He could feel the anger in the onlookers' gazes, and he knew this incident would not be easily swept under the rug. He tried to maintain a shred of dignity, but under the pressure from Mariah and the crowd, he realized that the situation had spiraled far out of his control. Aaliyah, though still shaken and hurt, felt grateful that her grandmother had arrived just in time. She knew that this was only the beginning of a long journey, and justice would have to be served. But back home after the terrifying incident, Aaliyah couldn't shake the feelings of humiliation and injustice. Though she was free from the handcuffs and shielded by Grandma Mariah, she felt as if her entire world had been turned upside down. Before being pulled over, she had been a hopeful young woman with a new car and a bright future ahead. But in a single moment, all those dreams were shattered by the suspicion and prejudice of one police officer. She walked into the house, exhaustion washing over her. Grandma Mariah followed closely behind, her eyes still filled with concern, but also with determination. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, placing her hands on Aaliyah's shoulders. "If you need to rest, you can. This will be taken care of, and I'll make sure of that." Aaliyah nodded lightly, but inside, emotions surged uncontrollably. She couldn't sit idly by and let this pass. This wasn't just about her. It was about the millions of other people of color who face judgment and discrimination every day because of the color of their skin. This couldn't continue, and Aaliyah knew she had to do something. She sat down at the table in the living room, opened her laptop, and stared at the screen, her eyes burning with resolve. Deep down, she knew that if she didn't speak out, nothing would change. She had heard so many stories about discrimination before, but now she had experienced it, and there was no turning back. Aaliyah began typing, recounting the entire incident from the moment Officer John Mitchell had pulled her over. She described the terror she felt when she saw the flashing red and blue lights in her rearview mirror and the rising panic as she was ordered out of her car without a clear reason. Aaliyah detailed every step, from Mitchell's suspicious eyes to the disgust in his voice as he made her place her hands on the hood, disregarding her sincere explanations. She recalled the moment Grandma Mariah appeared, like a guardian angel, rescuing her from the terrible situation. Every word she typed seemed to reflect the pain and anger she felt. "This isn't just my story," she wrote, "but the story of millions of people of color who are judged unfairly just because they don't fit the image society considers normal. This is part of a larger problem, one we can no longer ignore. We deserve respect, not to be treated like criminals simply because of the color of our skin." Aaliyah paused, rereading what she had written. She felt the words conveyed her emotions accurately, but was it powerful enough to truly express the pain and injustice she and so many others endured? In a moment of hesitation, she thought about the stories of other people of color, people who had endured too much judgment just because of their appearance. She knew that silence wasn't an option. Change only happened when someone had the courage to stand up and fight. But the post alone wasn't enough. Aaliyah decided to include the video that a bystander had recorded. She opened the video and watched again the terrifying moment when Mitchell handcuffed her, despite her pleas and Grandma Mariah's intervention. The image of a young woman with fear and humiliation in her eyes, being dragged away like a criminal, was undeniable evidence of the injustice she had faced. The video spoke louder than any words, and Aaliyah knew it would grab people's attention. She added the video to the post and paused for a moment before hitting publish. She knew that once this story was made public, her life could change. Would it bring about the change she hoped for, or would it lead to more trouble? Would she receive support, or would she face backlash? But then the image of Grandma Mariah standing in front of Mitchell, fearless, flashed in her mind. She had always taught Aaliyah that silence only fueled injustice, and now was the time for Aaliyah to follow that lesson. With a deep breath, she clicked publish. The post immediately gained attention. Within minutes, notifications on her phone started piling up, signaling that her story had begun to spread. Comments flooded in beneath her post, with many people expressing outrage at Officer Mitchell's behavior. Some shared similar stories of racial discrimination, while others were horrified by the video. "I can't believe this happened," one person commented. "Thank you for being brave enough to speak out. We stand with you," another wrote. In just a few hours, Aaliyah's post had gone viral. Her story didn't just expose a personal incident, but also touched on the shared pain of many people of color who had been subjected to systemic discrimination for generations. News outlets began reaching out to her, asking for interviews about the incident. Unprepared for the sudden spotlight, Aaliyah felt surprised, but also empowered by the strength she never knew she had. Though overwhelmed by the attention, Aaliyah knew she had made the right choice. She was no longer the frightened and humiliated girl who had been handcuffed on the street. She had turned that injustice into action and had found a voice she never expected to have. However, Aaliyah knew this was just the beginning of a long journey. She realized that the fight for justice didn't end with telling her story, but would continue as she stood up for others who didn't have the chance to speak. As Aaliyah's post continued to spread rapidly across social media, the issue became more than just a personal incident. It became the center of attention for the entire community. News outlets and media began covering the story, and the video of Officer Mitchell handcuffing Aaliyah was shown on various television networks. Strong criticism started to pour in against Officer Mitchell and the police department where he worked. A few days after the story exploded, Mitchell realized that his life had completely changed. From a confident officer entrusted with keeping the area safe, he was now facing a wave of unprecedented backlash. Outside the police station, protesters gathered with signs, chanting for justice for Aaliyah and demanding reforms within the police force. Mitchell wasn't just being condemned by the public, he was also facing questions from his superiors. Sitting in the police captain's office, Mitchell could feel the tension in the air. Captain Reynolds, a middle-aged man with partially graying hair, sat behind his desk, looking at Mitchell with disappointment in his eyes. "Mitchell," he began, his voice low but firm, "do you understand how badly this situation has escalated?" Mitchell lowered his head in silence. He knew there was no excuse for his actions. He had believed he was doing his job when he suspected Aaliyah, but now, under the weight of truth and pressure from the community, he couldn't deny that he had let his biases cloud his judgment. "You've disgraced the entire department," Captain Reynolds continued. "Your poor judgment didn't just hurt an innocent person, it has caused an uproar in the community we are supposed to protect. And now, we're all facing the consequences of your mistake." Mitchell sat motionless, feeling the disappointment and anger in his superior's voice. He hadn't just lost the trust of his superiors. He could also feel the weight of judgment from his colleagues, who had also been affected by the incident. The atmosphere in the office was heavy and silent, broken only by Captain Reynolds' deep sigh. "You're suspended immediately," Reynolds announced, his voice resolute but tinged with disappointment. "Not only that, but you'll also have to complete 100 hours of community service. This is your chance to reflect on your actions and learn from your mistake." Mitchell nodded quietly, though inside he felt as if his world had crumbled. As someone who had once taken pride in his career as a police officer, he now had to face the fact that his unconscious biases had led him to make a grave mistake, disrupting his life and that of others. I was just trying to do my job," Mitchell whispered, his voice filled with a sense of defeat. "I didn't think things would turn out like this." Captain Reynolds looked at him, his gaze cold. "Doing your job doesn't mean letting prejudice guide your actions. You can't keep excusing mistakes like this. We're here to protect, not judge." Mitchell left the office with a heavy heart. He walked past his colleagues, feeling the weight of their scrutinizing and disappointed gazes. Every step he took felt slow, as if the burden of shame weighed down on his shoulders. When he reached the locker room to pack up his belongings, the sense of loss overwhelmed him. A large part of his life had been tied to being a police officer, and now everything seemed to be slipping away. After leaving the police station, Mitchell began his community service at a local soup kitchen. Here he was tasked with helping distribute food, and cleaning up. On his first day, he walked into the kitchen with a sense of resentment, seeing this as nothing more than punishment in a way to appease public opinion. However, as he started working, he gradually realized that this wasn't just a job, but an opportunity to confront reality and listen to the stories of those around him. One afternoon, while he was serving food, he listened to the story of an older black woman who shared the fear and injustice her son had endured when he was wrongly suspected by the police. She recounted how her son had been pulled over simply because he was driving an old car, and how his life had been turned upside down since then. Mitchell listened quietly, feeling the pain and helplessness she had experienced, and he couldn't help but draw a connection to his own actions toward Aaliyah. Stories like this slowly began to change Mitchell. He started to realize that the prejudices he had carried throughout his career weren't just personal mistakes, but part of a larger system that had harmed many innocent people. Mitchell couldn't deny that the change within him was starting. With each passing day of community service, Mitchell met more people and heard more stories of injustice and the wounds caused by discrimination. At first, he felt uncomfortable, as if each story was a direct criticism of who he was. But over time, he began to accept that he had been wrong, and that this was his time to learn and make amends. Day by day, Mitchell began to see the world differently. He no longer viewed things through the lens of prejudice, but began to understand that every person had their own unique story in life, and they couldn't be judged based on appearances. Mitchell understood that this was just the first step in his journey of change. He knew he needed to do more to make amends for the damage he had caused. Completing community service hours alone wasn't enough to erase his mistakes, and deep down, he began to feel the urge to do something to make up for what he had done to Aaliyah and the community he had hurt. Mitchell's change in thinking had begun, but he knew there was one more important step he needed to take: facing Aaliyah. After many days of reflection, Mitchell decided to write a letter of apology to her. He didn't expect immediate forgiveness, but he hoped that he could find some understanding and a chance to right his wrongs. One morning, Aaliyah received a letter from Mitchell. As she opened it, she couldn't help but be surprised. Inside, Mitchell expressed deep regret for his actions, acknowledging that he had acted on unconscious bias and wanted the opportunity to speak with her directly. He apologized for not listening to her, for judging her based solely on her skin color, and admitted that the encounter had changed the way he viewed the world. Mitchell ended the letter with a request to meet, hoping to rebuild trust and start the healing process. Aaliyah sat in silence for a moment after reading the letter. She had never imagined that Officer Mitchell, the man who had wrongfully arrested her, would express remorse and want to talk. Her emotions were conflicted. Part of her wanted to reject the meeting, to protect herself from the negative feelings that the event had caused, but another part of her, especially the part shaped by Grandma Mariah's teachings about justice, told her that dialogue might be the way to resolve these wounds. Aaliyah remembered something her grandmother had once said to her: "Sometimes, forgiveness isn't just about freeing someone else, it's about freeing yourself." Those words echoed in her mind, and finally, she decided she was willing to meet with Mitchell. She needed to know if his remorse was genuine, and if facing the man who had hurt her could help her find peace within. Aaliyah agreed to meet Mitchell at a small cafe in the city. It was a neutral space where the two could sit down and talk without tension or pressure. As she walked into the cafe, her heart raced, and her emotions were mixed, from anger to the faint hope that healing could begin. Mitchell was already seated in the corner of the cafe, looking nervous and no longer carrying the confident demeanor she had seen in him the first time they met. As Aaliyah approached the table, Mitchell stood up, his movements awkward, but his eyes filled with remorse. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice low, somewhat weak, but sincere. Aaliyah sat down, remaining silent for a moment to observe Mitchell. She wanted to hear from him before deciding what to say. The atmosphere in the cafe was calm, with only the soft sound of background music and the clink of cups. After a few seconds of hesitation, Mitchell began to speak. "I want to apologize to you again, Aaliyah," he started, his eyes never leaving hers. "I acted wrongly that day. When I saw you driving that car, I didn't see a person with dreams and a future. Instead, I only saw your skin color, and I let my prejudice cloud my judgment. I know that's no excuse, and I'm truly sorry for the hurt I caused you." Aaliyah listened, feeling the truth in Mitchell's words. She didn't interrupt him, allowing him to explain everything he wanted to say. "I've spent a lot of time reflecting on my actions," Mitchell continued, his voice trembling slightly. "Working at the soup kitchen opened my eyes to a world I had ignored for too long. I met people, heard stories, and realized that my prejudice didn't just affect you, but has affected so many others. I can't change the past, but I hope to make things right and learn how to be better in the future." Aaliyah looked into Mitchell's eyes, sensing the sincerity in his words. She no longer saw the arrogant and cold police officer she had met that day, but rather a man grappling with the weight of his own mistakes. "Do you realize," Aaliyah began, her voice calm but firm, "that your actions that day didn't just hurt me, but they also shattered my trust in the system? I believed I could be safe, that I could live without being judged solely on my skin color. But when you pulled me over, when you didn't give me a chance to explain, I realized that I couldn't escape society's prejudice, no matter what I did." Mitchell remained silent, nodding as if he understood every word she said. Aaliyah continued, "But if you really want to change, if you really want to learn from your mistake, then I think that's the first step. I'm not sure if I can forgive you immediately, but I'm willing to listen and find a way for us to heal from this." Mitchell let out a sigh of relief upon hearing Aaliyah's words. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," he said. "I just hope that through this meeting, I can begin the process of change within myself and work with you to change this system." The two sat in silence for a moment, as if trying to absorb their emotions. Forgiveness wouldn't come immediately, but for Aaliyah, the conversation had opened the door for dialogue and healing. This might be the first step on a long journey, but she understood that dialogue was the only way to achieve real change. The meeting between Aaliyah and Mitchell opened a new door, not just for personal healing, but for the opportunity for both of them to create positive change for the community. While they couldn't say that everything had been resolved, Aaliyah felt that the dialogue had brought her some relief, and more importantly, she saw that Mitchell genuinely wanted to make amends for his mistakes. After they parted ways at the cafe, both of them agreed that this wouldn't be the end. They knew this was just the beginning, and if they truly wanted to bring about change, they needed to take further action. A few weeks after their meeting, Aaliyah and Mitchell began planning a dialogue program between the local police and the community. Aaliyah knew that what she and Mitchell had experienced was just a small example of what many others face daily. She wanted to use her story not only to raise awareness, but also to create real change in the way the police and the Black community communicated and understood each other. And Aaliyah spent a lot of time discussing the idea with Grandma Mariah. As a seasoned civil rights attorney, Mariah knew that change could only happen when both sides, the police and the public, were willing to listen and learn. She encouraged Aaliyah to continue this path, emphasizing that dialogue was the most powerful tool for breaking down the invisible but sturdy barriers between them. Mitchell, after being temporarily reinstated as a volunteer at the police station, also began speaking to his colleagues. He understood that many other officers carried the same unconscious biases he once had, and that this could only change if they were willing to confront and admit their mistakes. Mitchell shared his story with his colleagues, emphasizing that change started with recognizing that every decision based on prejudice could have serious consequences for others. Both Aaliyah and Mitchell knew that they couldn't change the entire system with a few conversations, but they believed that every small step mattered. With the support of Grandma Mariah and the solidarity of some in the community, they organized the first dialogue session at the local community center. Officers from the area, along with community members, were invited to attend. That evening, the atmosphere in the hall was tense. Many people in the community, especially those of color, entered with skepticism. They had witnessed too much injustice and violence at the hands of the police, and it wasn't easy for them to believe that a conversation could change anything. On the other side, the police officers were also anxious. They knew this wouldn't be an easy talk, and they could be facing harsh criticism. Aaliyah stood in front of the crowd, her heart racing, but she knew she had to be strong. She began by recounting her story, from the moment Officer Mitchell pulled her over to when he handcuffed her on the street. She didn't shy away from any details, vividly describing the fear, humiliation, and helplessness she had experienced. The crowd listened in silence, many resonating with her story, knowing they had been in similar situations. "I'm not here today to say that everything is okay," Aaliyah said, her voice steady. "I'm here to say that we need to have a dialogue, to listen to each other if we want things to change. I was lucky to have the chance to face the person who hurt me, and I believe that if we want a better future, we have to dare to do that with each other." After Aaliyah's speech, Mitchell stepped forward, his eyes filled with emotion as he looked at the crowd. He knew he would be judged by both sides, the community and his colleagues, but Mitchell was ready to face whatever came. He shared his story, from letting prejudice control his actions to realizing his mistake while working at the soup kitchen. "I don't expect immediate forgiveness from anyone," Mitchell said, his voice low but determined. "But I want to start by admitting that I was wrong. And it's not just me. Many of my colleagues need to realize that we're not perfect. What's important is that we're willing to learn and change." Mitchell's words didn't immediately earn applause or approval from the crowd, but they created a necessary silence, a silence of reflection, of consideration. People seemed to be reevaluating what they had just heard, and some began sharing their own stories. The dialogue session lasted longer than expected. Stories were shared, strong criticisms were voiced, and slowly, some understanding began to form. Aaliyah and Mitchell, though coming from different positions, both understood that this was an important first step toward breaking down hostility and prejudice between the police and the community. After the first dialogue session, Aaliyah and Mitchell realized they had created something significant. It wasn't just about their personal growth, but about providing an opportunity for many others in the community to speak up and directly engage with those in power. They didn't stop. Subsequent dialogue sessions were held, drawing more and more participants. Aaliyah began to emerge as a leader of this movement within the community, while Mitchell, as a police officer, continued to talk with his colleagues about the importance of change. Both of them knew that the road ahead would be long and full of challenges. With each dialogue session held, Aaliyah and Mitchell could feel the change. The initial tensions between the community and the police began to dissipate, replaced by sincere and honest discussions. The two of them were no longer just individuals facing a problem, but had become pioneers in a movement to build understanding between both sides. The dialogue sessions gained increasing attention from the wider community. People from other areas began hearing about their program and reached out to participate. Not only were people of color coming to share their stories of discrimination, but people of all backgrounds were joining, eager to contribute to change. These gatherings became more than just conversations between the police and local residents. They became a platform for discussing prejudice, misunderstandings, and how to break down social barriers. Aaliyah, with the enthusiastic support of Grandma Mariah, began building a network of connections with other local communities. She received invitations from schools, churches, and community centers to organize talks not just with the public, but also with other police officers. She knew that if real change was to happen, she needed to expand the program and bring these discussions to more places. A key factor in the success of the program was Mitchell's strong commitment. While he continued to face criticism from some in the community, many had started to change their perception of him as they saw him sincerely trying to start over. Mitchell didn't just attend the dialogue sessions. He also actively encouraged other officers in the police force to participate. He organized internal meetings at the police station, sharing his story and urging other officers to recognize the unconscious biases in their work. The conversations within the police department weren't always easy. Many officers felt uncomfortable admitting that prejudice might affect how they did their job. There were tense discussions, with veteran officers fiercely debating whether racial bias really existed within the force. However, thanks to Mitchell's patience and determination, some officers gradually began to open up. They didn't just listen to Mitchell's story, they also joined the community dialogues. At one internal meeting at the police station, a young officer shared, "I didn't think I had any biases before, but after hearing Mitchell's story and what he went through, I realized that sometimes I've had similar thoughts without even realizing it. I think we all need to reflect and improve." This acknowledgement, though small, was a major step forward in changing the mindset of some officers. Aaliyah also attended some of these meetings, and her presence, as someone who had once been a victim of racial bias by the very police force she was speaking to, had a profound impact. She didn't come to accuse or condemn, but to encourage dialogue, to help people see that change was possible. The discussions slowly began to make a real impact. The community and the police no longer looked at each other with suspicion, but began building relationships based on mutual respect and understanding. Some officers even started getting involved in community activities, from helping with charity projects to mentoring local youth programs. Aaliyah began to see the results of her relentless efforts. She received letters and messages from families in the community, thanking her for having the courage to speak up and create a safe space for everyone to share their stories. Many teenagers who had once been terrified of police encounters now felt more at ease knowing that some officers truly cared about them. However, not everything was smooth. Despite the growing support for the dialogue program, there were still those who opposed it. Some people felt that the dialogues were just temporary fixes and wouldn't fundamentally change a system rooted in prejudice. Conservative officers within the police force remained skeptical, refusing to believe that their biases were an issue and continuing to hold on to their old ways of thinking. Aaliyah understood that changing such a large system couldn't happen overnight. She knew there would be people who would resist change, and there would be obstacles along the way. But for her, seeing the small but significant progress within the community, from heartfelt stories to officers opening their hearts, was enough motivation to continue on this path. Mitchell, the man who had sparked the entire series of events, had now become an indispensable ally to Aaliyah in this long journey of change. He was no longer the proud and rigid officer he once was. Instead, he had become a guide, sharing his experiences to help others avoid the same mistakes he had made. Looking back on the progress they had made, Aaliyah realized that she wasn't just changing her own life. She was helping to change the lives of her entire community. The dialogue sessions weren't just breaking down prejudices. They were building a stronger foundation for the future, where police and citizens could work together rather than be at odds. Aaliyah understood that her journey and that of her community was far from over, but the small steps she and Mitchell had taken gave her the belief that change was indeed possible. As the dialogue program continued to grow and gain widespread support, Aaliyah could feel the difference not only within the community, but also within herself. She was no longer the frightened young girl who had been handcuffed that day. Now, she had become a strong leader, determined to use her experience to build a more just future. The difficult days, the tense discussions, and even the opposition from some people did not discourage her. She saw the results of her work. Police officers and citizens were starting to understand each other better. Teenagers no longer felt as much fear when encountering officers on the street, and the dialogue sessions continued to bring hope to those who had once felt abandoned by the system. One day, as Aaliyah stood on stage in a large auditorium, giving a speech about the success of the program, she remembered the moment it had all started, the moment she sat at her computer, deciding to share her story. From a social media post, her story had gone viral, and now it had become an inspiration for so many others. Applause echoed throughout the auditorium, but what moved Aaliyah the most was seeing the faces in the crowd, those who had participated and supported her from the very beginning. Mitchell was also present at the event, standing quietly in the back of the auditorium. He watched Aaliyah with respect, knowing that she had not only changed the lives of those around her, but had also changed his life forever. Mitchell understood that without Aaliyah's persistence and compassion, he might never have realized his own mistakes or had the chance to make amends. As Aaliyah stepped down from the stage, Mitchell approached her. "I never thought I'd see a day like this," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "You've accomplished something very few people can. You didn't just change me, you changed how we all see each other." Aaliyah smiled, feeling the weight of his words. "We did this together," she replied, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I couldn't have done this without your commitment and the support of everyone in the community." Mitchell nodded, his eyes glistening with hope. "We still have a long road ahead, but I believe we're on the right path." The journey wasn't over, but Aaliyah and Mitchell both understood that they had come a long way from where they had started. With every step forward, they had proven that understanding, dialogue, and determination could break down even the toughest barriers. Their community had not only become more connected, but stronger, with the belief that change wasn't just possible, it was necessary. As Aaliyah returned to her work, preparing for her medical exams while continuing to grow the dialogue programs, she knew she had found her true calling, not only to become a doctor to heal bodies, but also to become a healer of society by helping others understand one another, breaking down prejudices, and building a fairer future for everyone. Looking ahead, Aaliyah realized that every action, no matter how small, could lead to great change, and she was ready, with all her heart and determination, to continue on this journey. Aaliyah's story is not just the personal journey of a young woman standing up against injustice, but also a story about the power of dialogue, compassion, and determination to create change. It reminds us that no matter the prejudices or obstacles we face, each of us can contribute to building a fairer and more understanding society. Through Aaliyah's perseverance and Mitchell's transformation, we see that even the most difficult conflicts can be healed through listening and learning from one another. Their journey is not just about breaking down prejudices, but about planting the seeds for a brighter future, where people are treated with respect and dignity, regardless of their skin color or background. It's a message of hope that with determination, each of us can be a positive force for change in society. If you found this story inspiring and want to join us on more meaningful journeys, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss out on stories that change the way we see the world.